Attendees are in listen-only mode.
Good afternoon, everyone. This is Elizabeth George. I am Director of Membership and Programming with USTOA, and I want to thank you all for attending our webinar this afternoon. And as well, I am so sorry to tell you that Terry Dale will not be here to welcome you for this presentation. He is stuck at the airport trying to get back home, but he has asked me to go ahead and share his regrets with you, and will, I'm sure, want to participate in listening to this wonderful webinar that we're going to be presenting. And I do want to tell you just a little bit about our presenter. Many of you may know Dr. Coarsey. We had the pleasure of having Dr. Coarsey come a day before our annual conference this past December, and she did a wonderful workshop. Some of you may actually, who are on the webinar today, may have attended that. Dr. Coarsey is president of Higher Resources Incorporated. She also serves as an executive vice president of corporate philosophy and family assistance programs for Avium International. And she created Higher Resources in 1989 and has produced, since that time, videos and training programs for organizations that are designed to improve post-disaster response. Her training programs, Human Services Response, which highlight the unique role of the employee responders of industrial tragedies, are used by aviation and rail companies, cruise lines, oil and gas, and multiple agencies and organizations throughout the world. And she has really conducted training everywhere in such diverse areas as Japan, South Africa, North Africa, and Europe. She's co-founder and president and managing director of the Family Assistance Education and Research Foundation, which is a nonprofit organization which supports research and education of multidisciplinary response and improved organizational practices for delivery of services to survivors of disasters. And her book, The Handbook for Human Services Response, details nearly 20 years of her own research as to best practices for helping disaster survivors. So we are indeed very pleased to welcome her back. I just want to share with you, as you think of questions that you would like to ask her, please post them in our chat room, type the question in, and at the end of the presentation, I know Dr. Coarsey will be happy to address those. So without further ado, I want to welcome Dr. Coarsey to the webinar.
So thank you very much. Good afternoon, everyone. I would like to just go over then some of the very important information that we have discovered over the years, actually by practical experience. I'm so sorry to say that we are constantly involved in this work, and so we're pretty current in terms of the challenges that you face today when any of your own people, whether it's your own people on tours, your employees, or whomever, are away from home. The real challenge today is trying to get correct information to families before the social media. And so the challenge has always been great to get good information to families and be able to support them, help them. But today with social media, I'm sure it's no surprise to anyone. You've probably dealt with it yourself. It makes it even more difficult. So I'm going to go right into the slides then, and I certainly will entertain your questions, as Elizabeth has mentioned, as we go along. So in the interest of time, though, I'm going to press on with what we have found to be very important. One of the most important things that we see that's really a challenge for companies is not having good information on who it is that you need to contact in the event that a tragedy occurs involving one of your tours. And what we see is that some people don't take the question of emergency contact very seriously. So what we're recommending to organizations that we work with today, even in the case of employee forms, is that we try to use something that makes the question more germane. So instead of having just a place for emergency contact, we are really recommending a sentence or something that says, should you become ill or injured while away from home, who shall we contact, meaning that perhaps if they think of it as an illness or an injury, it's not quite as traumatic as what we all are concerned about, and that is there being a terrible accident or disaster. Not that all of it isn't as important, but I think this is a way to kind of get people to think about what we're really looking for. Who do they want us to call in the event of there being something that was unplanned and where we really do need to involve the family? And we always think it's important to know what language we're going to be dealing with at the time, because if we have a name and a number and we don't really know that there could be a challenge with regard to language, we're not going to be able to be as helpful. So we think that's an important point. And then what I'd like to say is many people around the world today think that in a case of a death that they can't notify directly a family of what's going on, because in so many countries, not the least of which the U.S. as well, in most cases formal death notification does indeed come from the police, the coroner, or physicians or other officials. But what we like to distinguish between is first contact and a formal death notification. And we do work all over the world with different police officers and different groups who agree with us that there's no law that says an employee or someone acting on the best interest of the people they're assisting, there's no rule, no law that says you can't tell a family that there has been an incident or some type of problem going on that potentially involves their loved one. That then saves any formal death notification to go through the appropriate officials, but it does mean that you're giving a heads up to people so that you can begin to communicate with them so that they don't feel the anxiety and all of never knowing until suddenly the police knock on the door. I'll say a little bit more about that later on. So next slide. So for example, recently there was a terrorist attack, I'm sure many of you know, in Tunisia. Several of the organizations that we work with, two in particular, had people that were on cruises at the time. Several were killed and injured. And so I'll just use that as an example of the kind of thing that I've been talking about. And we know that in those situations, they called the people that were listed as contact, and they actually said to them, there has been a situation that's going on, and we want to keep you in the loop. And in a case like that, it's very difficult, even if you think that, or you're hearing that some people have been killed, others injured, we think that the first call should be just to get people aware and then to actually give them a heads up, so to speak, because too often initial reports are not factual, and many times people have been told that their loved one was fine on their way home when in fact they were not, and other times people have been told that someone has been killed and they were not. So we really think that that first contact should be to get them in the loop and to only use facts. And we think it's really important to always know, and I'm sure you would anyway, but who's traveling together, because many times that can be a huge help to you who has to do this very difficult task. So next slide. So we think some of the information that's important for you to consider before is to, as I just had mentioned the point, really know who else is touring with them so that in many cases they can actually help you in that contact. And it's much easier to get bad news from a family member or a neighbor or a friend than it is a stranger. And so we always like to make sure that we use those people as often as possible. Even if we do that, though, let's say that partners are traveling, one partner calls the family at home and says, oh my God, this has happened, and so forth. We think that that is a better way to give the information, but on the other hand, even then, we feel that it's important for you who work for the company that they're traveling with, so that you can be in the loop to help them with the accommodations and all the things that we'll talk about in a minute. Often people say, well, if their partner has already told the family, then there's not much else for us to do. We find that is a really missed opportunity that really could work in your behalf in taking care of your valued clients and people that are counting on you. So we do believe that even in a case of terrible example of repatriation, We think a company should remain involved there too, because there's a lot of communication that a company can help carry out that a family waiting at home can really use when they're trying to understand exactly what's happening with their deceased relative. So next slide. So if we were actually beginning this call, and as I said earlier, we unfortunately get involved in a lot of these for our members of our Family Assistance Foundation as well as our client organizations. And so first we want to be very clear with who we call, who we are, which organization we're representing. And what we want to say is that there has been an incident, or if you know it's a full-blown accident and people have been injured and killed, and that's usually the distinction, it's okay to say that. I think if you're hearing it's a terrorist attack and you're not quite certain, I think it's important then, obviously that's not an accident and it's not an incident because it's much too serious, but I think you are within keeping of what we found to be sensitive to go ahead and say there has been an incident or a disaster in that particular country or whatever, because then you are letting them know up front that you're calling them about something very serious. And we don't find that people get upset with us when we use serious terms to the point. In fact, the reverse is true. We find that when people making this kind of call try to sugarcoat or beat around the bush, we get really bad results from that. People feel as though that someone is trying to get between them and the truth of their family. And so we like to go ahead and be very direct with what it is that we say, there in mind, though, of course, with the most sensitive of tone and so forth. And so I think it's really important, the good news, to be able to say there has been a disaster at this particular location. I'm so happy to tell you, though, that our news is that your loved one is safe and they should be calling you shortly. We just wanted to let you know this and to provide information with you as to how you can have somebody inside our company to be in touch with. If you are unsure as to the condition and location, and that's usually more what happens in the first several hours, particularly when we're dealing with some type of terrorist attack where there is a lot of damage to an area where literally sometimes it's very hard for them to determine who's where and who's in the hospital and so forth. We think it's still really important to call out and let them know that you are the person that will be able to give them updates and further information. We think it's very important to give your name and a number that really can be used for 24-hour contact. We know that you may have different shifts and so forth, so we just think that it's important, though, that people have a 24-hour contact as opposed to just your individual cell if you don't intend to answer past midnight or something like that, particularly when you're dealing with people all over the world and you may get information at a time that is perhaps not when you are up and around, but perhaps somebody else will get that information and start moving with it. So we think that 24-hour contact is very important. So next slide. So we know that it's important to let people know who you are, how to contact you, or what that 24-hour number is, explain how you can get back with how they can get back to you, but also that you will get back with them on additional updates. We always believe that the most important thing when we're dealing with tragic news on a telephone is to end the call by letting people know what is going to happen next. In the case of death, of course, we would be working with local authorities to make sure that they are going to deliver the actual news. Meanwhile, we've been in touch letting them know their loved one is involved, and we're working behind the scenes to make sure that the formal notification happens. It's really difficult many times at first when you believe that someone who's not been accounted for in a hospital, they're not walking wounded, as we use the term, able to call their families. It's hard to know what to do when you haven't identified someone yet, or the authorities are only giving you certain names and none of those names match the persons perhaps that you're looking for. Families have taught us that they much prefer us talk about them as being missing or unidentified rather than jumping ahead and referring to them as lost. And so those are two terms that we have found that really are preferable than making an assumption. When somebody is injured, we think it's really important to find out from your company, and you may know already, what it is you're going to offer people, like if you're going to offer transportation to that site so the family can be with them, if you're going to offer transportation for more than one person, which we always recommend because that takes a lot off you. It means that if it's, let's say it is the primary partner, then if they bring their sister or their brother or another adult, that really means then that they've got someone to lean on. Sometimes when someone is near death, some companies have decided to fly the children out for saying goodbye and so forth. But be that as it may, we do think that when you're having one adult travel to a situation like this, we have found it takes a lot of stress off you and your responders if they do have someone with them to provide that very personal support. Next slide. So we just covered a couple of these things, but I think it is important to know then when they land or when they get there, who is going to meet them. And again, coordinating with local authorities in the case of death is extremely important because many people, even when they know the person has died, they will want to be able to visit the morgue or begin to speak with someone about the nature of death and whatever information they can get. So, of course, working with local authorities is extremely important. It's also important to know, and perhaps you would anyway, but before you begin to speak with people where death has occurred, there may be questions that come up with regard to any kind of services and so forth that you're going to be involved with. I think that's mostly probably true for you all if it's your company, if it's your tour director, your employees, and so forth. So I throw that in because, God forbid, I know that sometimes it could be your own people that you are going to be involved with when there has been something of this nature. So next slide. What we always believe when we are first speaking with people and we're setting the stage of future calls about what's going to be happening, what's happening next, we always, in that first phone call, we have in our checklist to say to someone, for example, Mrs. Smith, I'm going to be calling you back shortly with more definitive news, but can you tell me, do you have someone with you that can wait? Because I know this is a very anxious time. And many people, if they don't have a family member there, they realize when you say that this is serious, and many people will even get their own neighbor, minister, someone, because most people don't want to sit and wait for this kind of phone call with more information and have to be alone. And we've also found over the years that sometimes you make this call because you want to make this contact, get them in the loop, let them know who you are, and move this forward, and you get a voicemail. So what we have surveyed families, actually talked to families that have been in a situation, and we've said, okay, what is your preference? If someone calls you with very bad news and we get your voicemail, how is it that you would prefer that we leave a message? Because obviously we don't want to say something that's extremely upsetting. We don't know who might get the call. We don't know if a child might pick up that voicemail, particularly if it's a home voicemail and so forth. So what we've found from the families themselves that have been through these horrible tragedies is that we leave a message that identifies our name, our number, our company, and we say something to the effect of, this is a very urgent phone call. Please call me at your earliest opportunity. That seems to get people moving. It's not the same as giving someone tragic news that a child or someone else might pick up, but it does let the person who gets the call know then that it is urgent and it is of urgent nature. And I apologize, I left out, we would always say, this, I'm calling for this particular person, and obviously that's going to be someone over 18, and that way when that person gets that message and they hear that it's urgent, I'm sure you're going to get a call very quickly. So we always like to have the person at home that we're talking with repeat our name and phone number. It isn't only because we want to know that they have it. It really is a little test that we have found effective to see how together they are. Because let's say that you call someone and they cannot repeat the phone number, and you can detect right away then that you really need someone of sound mind, so to speak, and most people are. In my 30 years of this work, I have found that most people, when we're talking to them on the phone, many times they will delegate this to a sister or brother or somebody that they feel is a little bit more capable of hearing all the information. But I've really not had people that weren't able to communicate with me. But just on the exception that you might have someone that is so upset, if they can't repeat that number, then it's a really good thing to say, is there someone there that can help you and help me so that we make sure that all of this very important information is relayed and that you do know how to reach me should you need to call me back. So it really is more than just information. It has to do with determining, do we have someone that we're going to be able to work with and accomplish what we need in a very short time span. So we know then that, again, I stress that we always end the call with information as to what's going to happen next. So next slide. Is that my last slide? I'm sorry.
I think that was our last slide. Sorry, I'm just trying to get our questions. Does anybody have any questions? If you do, please, post them, and we'd be happy to, I will share that with Dr. Coarsey.
Well, since there's just a little bit more time, shall I go ahead, Elizabeth, with just a couple of other recent examples?
I think that'd be wonderful. Yes, please do.
Okay. We had a situation recently, unfortunately, of one of the corporate aviation programs that we support. One of the pilots, unfortunately, took the plane out by himself. I mean, the good news is, of course, he didn't take anyone with him, but he did take off in the airplane, bring it right down into the ground, and unfortunately he was killed. The aircraft was destroyed, and it was ruled to be intentional by the local authorities. And this was one of those where it just challenged us in so many ways. There was a girlfriend, there was a mother, a father, but the father and mother were divorced. And so it brought up a lot of challenges that I'll just share with you in case you have something that you have to deal with like that. Number one, we typically, even when we're being told by authorities that it is intentional, we typically, if someone says, like one of the aunts on the phone said to me, do you think he committed suicide? Even though everybody was saying that on the official level, I said to her, the authorities will come out with a report very soon, which they did. It was in the newspaper the next day, and they will really talk about probable cause. But right now, we just want to help you and your family every way we can. So my point is, we tend to go away early on, even when people are suspecting. We kind of go away from anything that's going to add additional stress for them. Soon enough, the reports come out, and they have to deal with that. The other thing is we ran into a situation where the family wanted to go to the scene, and the company that we were working with wanted that to happen, so we set all that up. We got people there to meet them, but we knew that they were going to arrive on a Sunday, and we knew that the coroner and the investigators and so forth probably would not be working on Sunday. So we had a real challenge there with trying to be able to connect them with the authorities that normally people would meet with the next day and so forth. So we worked really hard behind the scenes. We talked directly with other officials that are more on a federal basis, and we got phone numbers and we got information, and we really were able to, with a lot of effort, put them together with the officials that could answer their questions and let them know what it was they were interested in. Unfortunately, the sister of the young man had a hard time with the news we were giving, and she continued to ask me on the phone, is he in the hospital? And that was very difficult, but there again, when we know that there are reports out there, we can direct people to that. We can say, you know, there are already in the news, there are some reports, and I think you could find more information about his condition, but to be honest, we are being told that he did not make it through the accident. So those are really difficult words, but there had already been the formal death notification, so I was within the guidelines to do it. But what I was staying away from was anything about why and how and the things, as I said earlier, that are just so much more sensitive for people. So kind of one of the rules of thumb is that we can typically say what is already known. So if officials have notified someone of the formal death, of the death in a formal way, we're safe to talk about that. If there's already press releases, which there were immediately on this, we can say whatever has been published in the news. We can even give them the reference. And that kind of thing helps, because it's so hard at first when you want to help people, but you're really being guarded because you wonder what all's out there. Well, once you find out what's out there, we're usually safe to work with that, although in a mass tragedy like the Tunisia situation, we wouldn't be giving names and information right away about killed or injured, because it was a while before they were able to say that. So this other example I gave would be the one-off situation. So just some more information there. So Elizabeth, is there anything else that you would like for me to address?
Well, we do have a question, and I'm going to read it. What can you suggest if the emergency contact is not correct or not reachable? How best to decide who to communicate with? And same if someone refused to provide emergency contact information.
Right. That's a really good question, and we dealt with one recently, unfortunately, where it was someone that died in an accident away from home, and the information they had left behind at their company was incorrect. So what we did is we called the police in that area, and even though it was a different state than the one where the man was missing, because he had gone down in the water, and it was a single person in an aviation situation. He had not been found yet, so there couldn't be a formal death notification. We weren't asking them to do that, but what we did is we called the police in the state or city where they were last, what they listed last. So let's just say, for example, to be more specific for your question, what we would have done there is we would have looked to see what is their home address, where do we think is best we can see where they live, because that was what we had to do here. So then we call local authorities. We literally called the police with the closest address, and we said there has been a tragedy involving someone that at one time lived at this home. This is the last address we had. So in this case, it would be, where did the person live who's missing or injured, killed, and we work through the authorities and say we are trying to find where someone else that either lives with them or lives near them. So to answer your question, what we've seen happen more than once is the police have helped find near the address of the person that the situation is happening to, a neighbor or someone in the area that could then answer questions about who lives there and what the family is made up of and so forth. So in one situation we had like that, we literally, through neighbors, we found the parents, because it was two adult men. One of them died in a terrible situation, and the other one we weren't able to communicate with. And so we got the police literally to find out who the neighbors were. The neighbors told us about the family and even had information about where the parents lived of one of the partners. So you use local authorities and you tell them exactly what's going on and what you need, and they can go right into records within a community, and it is amazing how much information they can come out with. With the one I was just speaking of that I worked recently with, the missing person, what happened there, and I mean missing in that they saw the airplane go into the water, but they did not see anyone come out. We didn't have a good phone number, so the police found the next through public records, they found someone else who is related to the family who was able to give us the new address, and through another group, another police officers, we found the actual name and number of the wife. And so that's how you do it. You use all of your resources. So
I have another question for you, Carolyn.
Okay.
Here, can you clarify that we, as the tour operator, can notify of death, or was it to always wait for law enforcement to make the notification? For example, in a cruise, who you suggest to contact, first government authorities or family contact?
Yeah, that's a good question, and it's a good way for me to clarify if I didn't do a good job. So with the cruise lines that we work with, they always go right into the emergency contact. And if there's no one traveling with them, I mean, if there's someone traveling with them, then the cruise line works with those people just like an airline would. They work with those folks to say, look, we want to help you support the family, but are you going to notify your mother that your sister has died or that your child has died or whatever? Family members can make the notification, and nobody has a problem with that because it's family to family. So the distinction between first contact and formal death notification is what I was talking about. So most companies that we work with, their typical policy or procedure, based on what we find that people prefer, is they will make that contact. If there's no other family member there that can do it for them, then someone will literally call the person to notify and say, we are calling to let you know there has been an incident or there has been an accident, and it involves whoever the person is, and we want to call you and give you more information later. Right now we are trying to get more information, and we're also working with local authorities to make sure that you do get all the information about whoever it is. And I'll be honest with you, that's the way we're supposed to do it. The aviation law, which I realize doesn't involve this question, but to be honest, a lot of this does come out of what families, literally thousands of families, have educated us on, and they are the basis of the law that's become best practice in cruise lines and most family assistance situations, not just in the U.S., around the world. And what families have told us, and as I mentioned, it's even in legislation, they want to know what you know. Now, families understand that there's some laws about who can say dead, but for example, if we call someone and we say, this is what's going on, we want to be your primary contact at XYZ company, we're also working with local authorities, then behind the scenes we're talking to local authorities about, are they going to make the death notification and when? And that's how you do it. And so I hate to say it, but it's a little bit of it's a challenge, because some police officers won't do this as fast as we would like. And so there have been times when we've talked to them more than once, them meaning the family, and then we literally in some cases say, the news is not looking good. And so in some cases, in a sense, we have told people without actually doing the formal death notification. If something tragic happens and an airplane's in the water, and everybody, and CNN and Fox News is saying no survivors, then when we make that first phone call and say we're confirming that your loved one is on the manifest, in a sense that is a death notification. But we still we still stay within the law, which says that it should come from police. So I know that's a complicated answer, but it is a complicated situation.
Thank you. Does anybody have any other questions? I'm just looking here to see if anything else is being posed. At the moment, I don't see it. I am going to just let everyone know now, and I want to thank you, first of all, Dr. Coarsey. This was so valuable, and obviously, I don't think we can ever not get enough of this type of training. And there will be another opportunity for this. October 28th and 29th of this year, we will be having a 2-day workshop at the W Chicago Lakeshore in Chicago, Illinois. And actually on the night of October 28th, we will have a business after hours at the hotel as well. And we will open registration for this probably within the next couple of weeks. So you can always look on our events page, and then as well we'll be sending out an email notification to you all. Well, if we have no other questions, and it looks at this moment like we don't, I will just let you know that, as I mentioned before, this webinar will be uploaded onto the members area of our website. So at your convenience, you will be able to experience it again or share it with your coworkers. And I want to thank Dr. Coarsey so very, very much for presenting this today. Such valuable news, and it's a resource that we know we hate to think that we were going to be using, but that we know we will at some point in time probably need to. So thank you so very, very much. And we will look forward to hopefully seeing many of you in Chicago for this expanded workshop. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.